Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to stop sharing now quickly and hand over the virtual stage to Tune and Ingun.
Thank you so much, and thank you for wanting to listen to us. I am Ingun Grimstad Klepp. I'm a professor in clothing and sustainability at the Oslo Metropolitan University.
And my name is Tone Skårdal Tobiasson, and as you can hear, I have a cold, but hopefully my voice will carry. I'm a journalist and an author, and I work with the dissemination of the different projects that mainly Ingun leads, but we also have some other projects together.
Yes, and we will talk about textiles and clothing today, and we can assure you that we have worked a lot with these issues for 20, 30 years, and the topic has become more and more discussed around us. So we have a lot of things to do to clear up in the discussions. When we talk about textiles, the biggest group of textiles is clothing, but textiles is also much more used in cars, used in buildings, used in agriculture, and of course home textiles as well. So we talk about textiles today, but our field is mostly clothing.
Next slide, please.
Yes, and what you can see here is the growth of the use of synthetics in textiles. And this picture is actually a YouTube video, and we will recommend it to you all. Have a look at it later today or another day. It explains things very fast and very in a good way. So that's a recommendation. So what you can see here is that since 1980, the synthetics has grown very fast when it comes to textiles. And in the bottom, you have these other fibers. The other fibers is the natural fibers mainly. And the biggest one among the natural fibers is cotton. Wool, for instance, is less than 1% of the global production of fibers. And the biggest one when it comes to the synthetics is polyester. Polyester is actually bigger, I mean, really, really big. And polyester is also used not only for textiles. So for instance, the PET bottles is also polyester. So we are actually talking about the same materials that we also discuss when it comes to packaging, for instance. But very often when plastic is discussed, it is discussed as textiles is not a part of it. And this is slightly changing now. So it seems to be that more and more people realize that textiles also are plastic. We will come a bit back to this, and we will not talk about all the other different synthetic fibers. We stick with synthetics as a big group, and we talk mainly about polyester, which is really the big one. And today it is between 60 and 70% of the total global production of fiber for textiles. And as you can see of the picture, it is expected that it will continue to grow in the same speed as has done the last 20 years. So we have it is expected to grow. The natural fiber has been stable all the time. Very little changes in the use of natural fibers. And then we can take the next.
Of course, when we have this issue around climate mitigation, the textile industry has understood that they need to take some very strong actions in order to reach the goals from the COP26, for example. And this is a slide that was shown a lot during the Textile Exchange conference, which happened last year. Textile Exchange is an organization, it's an NGO, and they work with the fibers. So that's what generally is known as Tier 4, which is the actual fiber production. And they have this goal that we need to mitigate the greenhouse gases, getting them down 45% by 2030. And this is their plan for how this should be done. As you can see, they have a business as usual line, which is in their eyes a 3% growth, when we know that the growth generally has been 6%. And they say that we can, of course, decrease this growth to 1%. That's how far they are willing to go. But then they have one of their most important and actionable points, which is materials substitution. And that is what they then call a change to preferred fibers, which we will get back to. They also have this this idea that there's an innovation gap, as you see, which is fairly large too. And this is sort of the big unknown, where you have the belief that new technical innovations is going to solve this problem. But that's in the blue. Nobody has the answer here. Nobody knows what would be scalable or what would actually work. But that is how they are looking at the future, according to how fibers should move in the next years. Next slide, please. And part of this then is they have a recycled polyester challenge. So what they have done is challenge all the members of the textile exchange, and there are a lot of big companies that are members here. And they want to increase the percentage of recycled polyester from 14% to 5% by 2025. That is only a few years, as you will realize. But what is interesting here is that when they are talking about recycled polyester, this is mainly not recycled polyester from polyester clothes. This is recycled polyester from old bottles, because that is what is easily available for them today. Recycling clothes into new clothes is still sort of a dream that perhaps one can realize that it happens up to maybe 1% today. So this very ambitious goal they have will not at all fit in with the ideal that you're recycling textiles into new textiles. It will only fit in with the idea that you're using bottles to recycle the clothes. And in the YouTube video that we showed you the link to in the first slide, there they show what actually happens when you're recycling the bottles into clothing, because it's a dead end. Then you can't keep recycling them over and over again. What if you keep them as bottles or other type of plastics? Yeah, packaging. Then you can recycle them over and over again. But in this scenario, where they want the increase from 14 to 45%, you are stopping the recycling at that point. So one can discuss to which degree this is a solution. So next slide, please.
Yes, Tone told you about the industry's plan to be better when it comes to climate by changing to what they refer to as preferred fibers. And then it's, of course, an interesting thing to look upon what is the preferred fibers in the view of the industry. And this is the list of what they regard as the worst one. And silk is really horrible. Alpaca, leather, cotton, and wool is on the list of the worst one. So they have made systems to compare different fibers, and this system will then be used to improve the company's environmental footprint by changing from the natural fibers to more synthetics. We can have a look at the next picture that actually is giving you an example on this way of comparing fibers. And as you can see in the bottom here is the alpaca wool, and then it's leather, and then it's silk. And polyester, which is, you know, the biggest, really big fiber today, is the third from the top. So you can see how huge the differences is in how much environmental burden they think the different fibers represent. So instead of improving the industry with doing less or better, it is improving it by changing from the old and expensive materials to the cheap material polyester, which is very much readily available and which also is the one that actually can increase in the speed that we have seen, because natural fibers has to be grown. It has to be, you have to use land and water and farmers and things that we can't, you know, do like this and then double in a year. It doesn't work like that. You have to plan it. You have to have access to these resources. With synthetics, it is different. And especially today, the synthetics will be very much ready available. And this picture is from the Higg index, which is the most used tool to compare environmental burden by the industry. And that again is linked to LCAs, which in the field of textile and clothing is very poorly developed for very many different reasons. And this tool is not open. You can't look upon what is used. It's not democratic, and most of it is not either scientific published. So you have a system building up on information that is hidden and behind paywalls, and also are organized by a company that earns money on selling access to it. So it's a lot of democratic problems with these systems as well. And the situation is actually getting worse. And then we can take the next picture. And that is because the European Union now plan to make a new system for giving information about environmental impact from different items on the market, not only clothing, but everything. This is called PEF, Product Environmental Footprint. And this is a system that will be a bit different than the environmental labeling system that we know from before. For instance, the SWAN in the Nordic countries and the eco-label in EU, and GOTS, which is a global system for clothing. These labels, they are based on information on the product, and they are also marks, that is labels that are on the product that is better than average. The new system is based much more on global average, and they are also then going to be a system that gives information on all kinds of products, not only the best ones. The problem now is that this system, the environmental footprint system, is developing for textiles. And the one that is working with this is actually the same people that has the power and have done the Higg index, which you already saw. And the knowledge and the numbers that will go into this system is actually these very wrong assumptions about the differences in environmental burden between natural fibers and synthetics. Then we can go on.
This is, of course, part of the EU's big plan for a circular economy. And the whole world is now agreeing that we cannot have a linear system. We need to think much more circular. I also encourage you to watch another YouTube movie, and it's, if you just look for Fashionscapes, A Circular Economy, you will see interviews with several experts who are critical to the idea of a circular economy that focuses on recycling, especially when it comes to textiles. And one of the people who spoke in this YouTube video is Veronica Bates-Cassatley, who's an independent analyst and who we've been working with a bit. And she says it very succinct in a way that when I hear recycling and circular economy, I don't hear something that's good. I hear a permission to consume more. And yesterday, both Ingun and I attended what I would call a sort of PEF, or product environmental footprint session workshop for dummies, which was presented by the European Environmental Bureau, where we heard a lot of people talking about how these LCAs work or maybe don't work as well as they should. And Veronica Bates-Cassatley also had a 10-minute session there where she talked about the complete lack of democratic process in this work with the European Product Environmental Footprint tool and going forward. And this session in its whole will be made available, but we are hoping now also to get the 10-minute talk that Veronica gave so that we can share it with everyone so that they can really understand what the issues are here and who is going to stand to gain from this, because that's a very important question, and who is going to stand to lose in the future if this moves forward. I really think that it is important to follow this work, because one thing is that this is about what the EU is deciding, but it's going to have a global impact. Because what the EU decides actually does, because the EU imports so much from the rest of the world that it is very important, and it's going to affect the poor and the marginalized farmers specifically in the global south. But then, can we see the next slide? This is an opinion piece that Ingun and I wrote for Science Norway, which is a website that disseminates recent science findings. And they do have an English part to it, so it's not all in Norwegian. And what we wrote about was the uniforms that the volunteers wore at the COP26, because they were presented as the most sustainable clothing ever, and that the producers of these clothes had spent so much time to figure out what would be the sustainable uniforms that the volunteers could wear. And so we contacted the producers of the clothing, and they were very proud to announce that it was all or mostly from recycled polyester, which means that it is mainly for recycled bottles. And there was, of course, a huge irony in this, because they were in Scotland. Scotland has a fantastic textile tradition with tartans. Also, they have the Shetland wool. So we specifically asked about the hats that they're wearing. You see they're wearing these colorful hats, all of the volunteers, but they would not answer what these hats were made from. So we had a spy placed in Glasgow who actually asked one of the volunteers to take off the hat and then showed the label inside that showed that the content was 100% acrylic. So this, everyone, is the sustainable future that we're looking at. Not the local Shetland wool, not the wonderful tartans. It is the plastic clothing.
Yeah, and I want to add that it's not only that these products, it totally is plastic. It's also that we know from working with clothes that these clothes are not going to have a long life. They're not going to be used for generations. This sort of clothing, very often with big labels to a specific event that are given as a present, is things that very seldom actually becomes your favorite. And when it comes to the impact of clothing, environmental impact, we have to remember that clothes can be used once or not at all, but they can also be used 1,000 times. And the differences are huge. So we are not necessarily talking about sustainable fibers at all, because sustainable fibers is actually the fibers that suits the product, and the product suits the wearer. And when these things goes together, we can have fewer and better clothes, and the impact goes down. So it's wrong here to say that synthetics are the solution, but it's also wrong to call this sustainable clothing regardless which fiber, because this is typically examples of clothing that will be used short time. And then we can go on.
Yeah, because in the next slide, you'll see where much of these clothes end up.
Yes,
right,
because now we have talked about production, and we have talked about the increase of production. But clothes are a global system, not only when it comes to production, but also when it comes to the life afterwards. Secondhand clothing, or clothes that hasn't been used at all, but still are unwanted in rich countries and are sent on a huge travel around the world. And I will then remind you that between 60 and 70% of the clothes actually are synthetics. So this is not only an export from the rich countries of clothing, it's an export of plastic. And as you can see, it is a system where they are transported first to be sorted, and then afterwards to be sold as secondhand clothing. From Norway, 97% of collected garments are sent out of the country. It's then sorted mainly in the Baltics, and then sent further mainly to African countries, but also East, South Europe. And the thing here is that this is also a system with a lot of leakage. It's not always the items is wanted where they arrive, and it's not always simple to transport and sort textiles to new use. And also EU, the European Union, has decided that all clothes shall be taken out of the normal waste and collected separately. This means that this system, which is today huge, will increase rapidly in a few years, because then it will be banned to send it through the normal waste systems in European countries, and also in Norway, which is not EU, but we are following the rules. So we have an increase from Europe. We will also have an increase, especially from China, where the clothing consumption is going up. And we have also an increase due to internet sales, because we have a lot of returns on internet sales, and these returns are often not sold again. They are entering the streams of secondhand clothing, which is not necessarily used. So we can take the next. And in Norwegian TV, we have just had a case about this, with clothing exported, not necessarily from Norway, but that is going nowhere. And Tone can explain how.
Yeah, this is the clothing desert, as they called it in Chile, in South America. And these pictures from this enormous waste of clothing in the Chilean desert has actually woken up a lot of consumers, I think in Europe, in Norway especially, and people are starting to see, the result of their overconsumption in a way that is very uncomfortable for them to deal with, because seeing these huge mountains of unloved clothing unwanted clothing that is laying there to rot is just, it's just horrible to see. And also in the YouTube movie about called Fashionscapes, the circular economy, there are similar pictures from Ghana, where the OR Foundation have captured the similar type of enormous waste areas of the clothing, and it's just heartbreaking to see. But I think we can move to the next slide.
Yes, and this picture is again to remind you that these mountains of used clothes are increasingly made of synthetics. That means that they will not break down to earth, they will break down to microplastic. And this picture is from an organization that works with this, and they have many very good reports that you can have a look upon if you like. For instance, about how big the percentage of synthetics from different brands, and also explaining what they called fossil fashion. And a very interesting and very important thing is that it is a very strong link between the increasingly use of synthetics and the increase in amount of clothing. This is because the synthetics makes it much more easy to produce clothes and also much cheaper. So if it wouldn't have the synthetics, we couldn't have the increase either, because of the natural fiber being so more difficult to produce, but also difficult to, not only as raw materials, but also as garments and other items, and also because of the price system. So have a look at this, and then in the bottom you can see that oil and gas companies are no longer mining for energy, they are mining for plastic. And as researchers in textiles, we have seen in many areas that when a material becomes unpopular in other industries, it is like thrown to the clothing industry, because clothing are in general very little regulated. So it's easier to have a increase there. So while other industries are talking about making the industry less dependent on fossil fuel, the textiles and clothing industry is doing the opposite. And for us, this is like amazing that the politicians don't see this and don't understand the impact of having one industry that are allowed to grow without limitation, fueled by fossil fuel. Yes, and then we can go on.
And when it comes to some of the hidden other areas that where synthetics are problematic, mainly, for example, when it comes to methane emissions, natural fibers like wool and alpaca have been attacked because, of course, the sheep and alpaca do emit methane. But when they have been searching around the world to find out where the major leaks are of methane emissions and where the increase has been, they're finding that most of the leakage comes from oil and natural gas industry, both from the extraction, but also from the transport of these fossil fuels, because there are leakages in the way that they transport it, and also from landfills. So it turns out that methane is much more tied to the synthetic and fossil fuel than it is to especially the increase in agriculture. But and then we haven't even begin to talk about microplastics, which is this huge problem that even the EU now is accepting is problematic, even though they can't quantify it in any way. But they see it as an emerging problem, but so far they're just putting off until further notice how this can be implemented in, for example, the PEF or product environmental footprint. So next slide, because I see we're running out of time.
Yeah.
And of course, then we know that one of the largest synthetic materials when it comes to microfibers turns out to be polypropylene. And this was established actually before the pandemic. And now they are so scared to look for the results after all these face masks have been thrown away all over the place. And of course, I have a friend who's been trying to salvage them. And as you can see, she made it into a dress of face masks. So she's trying to save some of this enormous textile waste out there. But when it comes to microplastics and microfibers, it's not just what ends up in the waterways, which is what has gotten most of the focus because it's been about laundering, etc. But there is so much of these microfibers that are in the air around us that we are actually breathing and going into our lungs. And the ironic thing here also is with the face masks, they have found that there are problematic chemicals involved here and that we are probably also breathing them in. But next slide, please.
Yeah, so it is possible that this carbon tunnel vision that is, we are concentrating on the CO2 emission and then you lose contact with all the other part of environmental burden. And also losing contact with what we need to have on Earth, like plural, cultural and diversity when it comes to nature. So we think that also the concentration of the attention to only one of very many problems has been one of the reasons why this has gone on without political attention. And especially for textile, as Tone explained, textiles are losing fibers all the time. It's in the production, it's in the use, and it is as waste. So the plastic problem is not only a problem of collecting in the end, it's a problem all the way because textiles are losing fibers when we are moving, when we are using them. Yes, so then we can go to the next. And this picture, we made it up and it's like a wish for the future. You can again see the blue in the bottom, the natural fiber production being stable, like here from the 1970s. And then you can see how the orange, the synthetic fiber, really started to grow some 20 years ago. But today, we want to have a look upon how it's possible to decrease it. Instead of continuing increase, we want a decrease of the synthetics. And we have tried also then to give you some other information. In the bottom, you can see the global population. We are the one to use the clothes, and because it has not been so much more people, but it has been so much more clothing, each piece is used less and less and less. And that is the green line. The green line is how often each items are used. So you can see this industry as an industry that has worked upon being less and less and less efficient, because efficiency is actually to make something with less materials. So more and more materials are used to dress the global population. So we wish this to change, so the items is used more, and to reach this goal, the synthetics has to go down again to a level where we use the synthetics, where synthetics are the best fiber to use, and not because it's a cheap fiber to use. Yes, so that is the last picture, I think. You can move on to the next, yes. And here you can see the projects that we mainly have been talking about today. We have one called Wasted Textiles, and it's founded by the Norwegian Research Council, and also a resource that you have money from, Handels Miljøfond in Norwegian, and I just forgot the English name for it, but I guess you know it. It was on the screen in the beginning today. And then we also have a project called Change about how much clothes we actually are in need of on the planet. And you will find all the project and us, the researchers, and all the different thing we produce on this internet site called Clothing Research. So thank you very much. And now we are looking forward to questions.
Thank you so much. It was fascinating to hear all the research that you're doing and all the work and the huge impact that the textile industry has that is often overlooked. I'm just going to pause the sharing quickly just to check if there are any questions. But in the meantime, I have a few questions based on what you've mentioned. You spoke obviously a lot about sort of the synthetic fibers and things like that. Can you comment at all about the microplastics produced during sort of washing and regular wear and tear? I know you briefly mentioned it, but as opposed to your regular items like wool and leather and things like that, can you comment at all on?
Yes, we can. All clothing loses fibers. So this is not specific for the synthetics. And when the discussion about microplastic and microfibers came up, it was much attention to the washing. And yes, we are losing fibers, microfibers in wash. That is both natural fibers and synthetics. So the new knowledge is much more that we lose fibers all the time, also when we are wearing it, going into the air, going to the earth, not only to the water. And then when it comes to microfibers, discussing microfibers and other kind of microplastic, the differences is actually the how it looks like, because textiles is in general something long and thin, and because it's long and thin, it is very useful. It can, you know, be used to tidying things. It is stuck with things. So actually, when it comes to animals in the water, for instance, the microfibers will be even more problematic than that a bit that is not a fiber, because it's easier fastened, for instance, in the gut of the fish or the animal. And textiles is also in general filled with chemicals because of the dyeing and finishing processes. So it's not clean plastic, if you can think about anything as clean. Yeah, so it's chemicals there, and it is the structure makes it easier to fasten, and this will also be, you know, pictures of birds, for instance, that this has entangled in typical textiles more than bottles, for instance. So textiles are a group of products that are more difficult both in use and as waste.
Okay, and the Higg index that you showed earlier, which was showing the sort of sustainability of the different materials, is that looking at the impact to produce the item, or is it looking at its overall lifespan, including kind of the durability of a sort of well-made item, perhaps leather versus your sort of plastic leather?
No, it is a life cycle assessment in itself, should be all the life stages.
Sure.
But for clothing, it is it hasn't been developed how to actually make a functional unit good enough. So in reality, what single-use products and 1,000-time use products are compared. And we know that for clothing, we know that polyester is the strongest material we do have, but it is not the one that is used most times. And EU has decided now in PEF that durability is important, but it will be measured as strength. So once again, it gives the synthetics the priority. Yeah, it is strong, but it is not used more anyway. So we think that instead of using strength as the way of measuring durability, we should have used consumer research, which shows a completely different pictures.
What picture does the consumer research show as being the most durable items?
Yes, a good question, and also difficult, because especially clothing is a very variety of things, and it depends not only about the wearer, but it's also depending on how much the wearer owns. So a big wardrobe will each item be used more seldom than a small one, but the items will become older. So it's not only the items, it's also the wardrobe they are a part of. But we know that more expensive clothing normally will be used longer, and also normally will be used second time more often. We know also that it goes the same with mending, that you more often will mend things with a value. But it's also things that is depending on the person. So actually, to have an increase in the use of clothing, we need a decrease in the amount of clothes to actually have each item to be used more.
Certainly, and it's really interesting the rebound effect that you mentioned, that because it's cheaper and easier to make sort of synthetic clothes, that we then produce more of them and you lose a few of the benefits there. I see we do have a few comments in the chat. There's one from Rafilwe that says, thanks for an insightful presentation. Who is responsible for decreasing consumption of clothing? Is it the producers or the consumers?
Well, it has to be the producers. You cannot put this on the consumers. And if we need to decrease the amount that is made available, because actually, if you're looking at what we already have, especially in the global north now, in our wardrobes, we wouldn't have to produce a single T-shirt for many years. But we do see this grassroots thing happening now with repair, which is very interesting, and especially with this visible mending trend. And so it's an interesting thing happening now, and the consumers are, in a way, maybe because of this, the pictures from Chile, from the desert there, but also for other reasons, in the pandemic, where they didn't need all the occasion wear because everybody was sitting, on Zoom, talking to each other. You just needed something that looked representative on top, and you didn't need anything else. So, sorry.
And we also think that this is not only the producer and the consumers, it's also the regulation that has to change. And it's many ways of doing that, but we need to have regulation that's actually are attacking the amount of clothing, not only pointing at something as more or less sustainable. And especially then, of course, when it is the synthetics that are pointed at as the sustainable, when we know that will mean growth. So it's we need the attention to change, but also the actual content of the way that sustainability are discussed in this area.
Okay, very interesting. And then there's another question here that says, do you think that origami clothes can possibly be used? It's a type of material that physically grows with a child. Instead of buying 10 pants, you only need to buy a child 2 pants and they will grow with them. I'm not familiar.
We have partly that system also in knits, because knits have much more stretch in them, so that children can actually grow more in knitted items than in ones.
I don't know. It is the fit issues are very important. If you look upon what is people stop using, it is 1/3 that is teared, wear and tear, 1/3 is fit issues, and 1/3 is lack of value. So of course, everything that has to do with fit is important. And the thing we do have today, clothes that are very fitted to the body, but are not made for each person. They are made ready-made clothes. This link between ready-made clothes and very tight-fitting clothes are actually not a good idea, because most people don't find really the things that fit, and then they buy something else, and then these items become worn more easily, but they also become bored of them more easily. So we do have a bad fit between the production system and how clothes look today. And that has been partly solved by more and more knitted garments, because of course it's more flexible than woven, but it's also solved by using more and more elasticity, which is also a synthetic fiber, and one of the really horrible ones, because it is not, it doesn't last. It has like a very short life. So it makes also other garments that could and should be used longer, make them die much earlier. So that's not only a synthetic problem, it's also a durability problem to use so much elastan in garments made both of natural fibers and of other synthetic fibers.
Okay, thank you. It's very interesting, the trade-offs there, and as with all the plastic items, there are trade-offs and sort of, yeah. I know there are a few different scales that also calculate the kind of the number of times you need to use something in order for bags, for example, the number of times you need to reuse a cotton bag for it to be more environmentally beneficial than your plastic bag. So I'd be very curious.
The counting there doesn't count. It is that study. It's a Danish study, I guess you're referring to. It's no good. Yeah, so you shouldn't believe it. It's yeah,
interesting.
But of course it is a piece of truth in everything, and the piece of truth here is that when you are comparing different things, of course how many times you use it is important. But it's a lot of other boundaries in that study that is not good. So don't use that. But if you need a textile bag to carry things, we do have enough textiles to make that bag of. You don't need it to be a brand new cotton, you know. For instance, in Norway, we do have a lot of outerwear, you know, jackets and things that is good to use for that sort of items.
Okay, so recycled within the fashion industry.
No, recycle much, or I believe that much more should be recycled personally. Yes, without the transport, without the sorting, just taken into use. And this is my personal opinion. Instead of sending used textiles to the other side of the world, we could, you know, make cloth out of it at home. So I think we have to work with localizing not only the production but also the recycle processes, because what textiles actually are used to today, it's downcycling and it's simple, so it could be done much more locally.
Okay, very, very interesting suggestions. I see we have another question that says, is textile pollution a regional problem or more of a global issue?
All our problems are global. Both the plastic problem is global, and of course the global warming is global. The specific thing about textile is that the production is global, and also the use of clothes are global because of this export of used clothing. So the clothing industry or the textile industry, it's much more global as such. And the problem we are facing is, of course, global.
Okay. And I see we're slightly over after 12, but I just have one more question. In terms of the circularity, you brought up a good point that I believe you said the other speaker mentioned about using circularity as an excuse to consume more. In terms of recycling and PET and things like that, I know there's often sorry, not often, but that there is a trend to use recycled PET bottles as new synthetic fibers. In a holistic circular model, would you say that there is sufficient feedstock for the textile industry if, for example, your PET bottles were to be recycled back into PET bottles at a later stage, when obviously it won't be sort of purely circular? Would they be able to use in the fashion industry after they were no longer fit for kind of food safe items?
You know, it is a discussion whether we can use plastics in systems without we don't control. I mean, if we are taking plastic pollution seriously, we should only use plastic where we have control, of it, and we don't have control when it comes to textiles. So it is a question whether textile at all can be made of plastics, and so this is now a discussion that we need to take, because if you have, for instance, plastics that is, inside the house, inside the washing machine, for instance, it's a professional that will do something with it when it's broken. But textiles are losing fibers all the time. So it is a discussion whether it can be controlled, whether we should have textiles of synthetics at all. And then this with resources, and that question we don't know the answer to, because how much clothes do we really need, and how much do we really produce? And when we talk about need, it's not only to be warm or protect us against the sun or something. It's also to take part in society, to be social beings, having a nice dress when it's a party, and feeling warm, feeling beautiful. So it's the social side of textiles and clothing is also very complicated. It's not only a technical issue, it's also something that is linked very closely to all situation where people are together. It is religious, it is practical, it's aesthetical, it is something to do with also how we regulate decency, not be naked together. So it is a lot of issues that are complicated, and we don't have the answer, but we are working with it in this change project, because we think we have to start also in the other end and start to think about how can a society without plastic pollution and without climate change look like? What sort of society is in the future, if it's a future? Because as we do it today, it is no future. The ocean can't take just more and more and more each year of plastic pollution. It's no, it has to be water also, not only plastic. And the global warming, of course, I mean, we don't need to go into details. So as clothing and textile researchers, we think it is important to look upon also how this can look like, and durability is part of it, but we might also be open to think that textiles and clothing will look very different from today. The society that we can create, if you want to, doesn't have to be a copy of the society we do have today. It can be something else.
Thank you so much, Ingun and Tuna. It's been really fascinating hearing the whole different side of the issues relating to sustainability and plastics. So thank you so much. And as you mentioned, sort of, bearing in mind sort of the future, you also want to sort of avoid any additional rebound effects in terms of producing more plastic bottles that then be used in the fashion industry and producing more and more. So thank you so much. It's been fascinating listening to you today. I see there's one last question, and I think we can close with that one if everyone's okay with that. There's one last question here from Rafilwe that says, who should be responsible for driving textile sustainability between the global south and the global north?
It's a very, very good question. And it's also a question indeed, and it's also a question about the big brands and the small, producers also in the rich countries. No, it's not all people rich anywhere. So it is also big against small. And as it is today, more and more rules are developed in in EU and other developing countries that are forced upon the rest of the world. And the one that is around the table are the one that actually are earning most on the systems today. So this is also a democratic problem that the global south or the small holders, the small producers aren't asked. We know most about the PEF system in EU, but I guess it is a lot of the same with other tools that now are developing to regulate environment better. And I don't have an answer. I just can see that all the systems that we are seeing now developing don't take it seriously, that someone is to be harmed, and the one that is going to be harmed is not the big brands that are that has created the problem that we are that we are facing. So I think the question is very good, and we have to remind ourselves of this, but we don't have a solution. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. I mean, I think there are often so many trade-offs. It's not necessarily one. There never seems to be one clear-cut solution that we can all follow. But thank you so much. It's been very interesting hearing your opinions, as well as all the whole different side of things that I think many of us aren't always aware of. So thank you so much. I don't see any other questions at the moment, but if anyone does come up with any questions later, please feel free to email us at webinars@scafrica.org.za, and we'll pass that along to our speakers today. I think we can close off here. Apologies for going a bit over time, but it was a very interesting presentation.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you so much. Bye.